It is a pleasure for me to welcome and introduce to you Ms. Katalin Tünde-Huber from the Austrian Ministry of European and International Affairs. Ms. Huber worked from 2002 to 2005 for the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe. During the second Austrian EU presidency in 2006, she was responsible for EU enlargement issues with focus on Croatia and Turkey. And also in 2006, she joined the Austrian Ministry for Foreign Affairs. And since autumn last year, she is the head of the unit for EU enlargement. Today, Ms. Huber will give us a short overview on the EU enlargement process with focus on the Western Balkans. Ms. Huber, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning from my side to all of you all over Europe. It is a great honor and pleasure to be here with you and to participate in this conference. I would like to thank KDZ for inviting me, and I would really like to congratulate you for putting together such a great virtual conference. I'm really amazed by all the technical equipment that you have with breakout sessions and this interactive part, which woke me up because I'm definitely not an early bird. So, and I think the EU can learn a lot from you because I have never seen such an interactive and well-functioning conference on European level. Ladies and gentlemen, I was asked to give a presentation on EU enlargement, which is a highly political topic, but also a very technical one. So please bear with me or raise your hand in case it gets too technical. And I'm also happy to answer questions after my presentation. I think maybe we can start with the first slide now in the background. Just a few words on Austria's position. You're all well aware that the Danube region and the Western Balkans are very close to our hearts. Austria is a close partner of the countries of the so-called Western Balkan countries. And the EU accession of the region is one of our top priorities of our foreign policy. The region is in our direct neighborhood. It is therefore in our core interest to create a region of stability, democracy, and prosperity. We have close historical, economic, and cultural ties with the region. And I'm sure some of you know, but 500,000 of Austrians have their roots in these countries. We are therefore convinced that the European family will only be complete with the accession of all Western Balkan countries. The countries of Southeast Europe are also an important market for our economy. Austria is one of the most important investors. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, we are #1, in Serbia and North Macedonia, #2. The investments create jobs in the region, but also secure jobs in Austria. So therefore, we need an even closer economic cooperation, and it is in the utmost interest of such a closer cooperation that the countries align their laws, regulations, and also working methods with European standards. In our view, this objective is best achieved by bringing the Western Balkans closer to the EU and to integrating them into the European Union. We are convinced that this EU perspective is the best engine and motivation for urgent but often very difficult reforms. Well, we are also aware that this region is of huge interest to other international actors. If Europe neglects the region, the influence of other international players like China, Russia, Turkey, or Arab states will grow. They are already visibly present with big investments in core sectors like industry, infrastructure, and energy. And it can't be in the interest of Europe to leave such an important and close region to the influence of other actors. Can I have the next slide, please? So therefore, as this region is of geostrategic interest to all of the EU and to Austria, and with our close historical ties, we strongly advocate the EU accession of the region to the EU. This slide is a bit outdated. It shows the big, strong American express, which has not been the case lately. So I would maybe replace it now with some other flags of countries that I've just mentioned. But I like the slide or the picture because of, yes, I think the very clear presentation of the European so-called express. We have been rather lame in the last years. Can I please have the next slide? Let's turn now to EU enlargement. The enlargement of the EU has always been part of the European agenda. So far, there have been 7 enlargement rounds in which the Union has grown from the 6 founding members in 1957 to 28 and now 27 members. Austria joined with Finland and Sweden in 1995. In 2013, the last member joined, which was Croatia. And unfortunately, on 31st of January 2020, the United Kingdom was the first member state to leave the EU, and we really hope that it is the only country to leave the EU. Let's have a look now at the accession process. Can I have the next slide, please? The accession process is a multi-stage process. And there are many phases, but I would say it can be structured in 3 major phases. So the official start is the application by a country, and all European countries that follow the values of the European Union can apply. The EU, the Commission, and then the member states are evaluating the level of the standards of the country, and are evaluating if the country can be provided candidate status, or, which is now the case with most of the countries, if further measures and reforms are necessary in order to be granted candidate status. For example, Bosnia and Herzegovina applied for membership in 2016, and so far they have not received candidate status. Then we move on to the accession process. Once the candidate status is given, it starts with a screening process, which allows the candidates to familiarize themselves with the acquis, and which will also identify those areas in which further progress is needed. In these cases, so-called benchmarks are proposed, which have to be met before officially starting the membership negotiations. So the formal accession negotiations are divided in 35 chapters, in which the whole EU acquis, so the whole legislation of the EU, has to be adopted and also implemented. There is a new methodology in place, which will not only focus on 35 chapters, but will also formulate clusters of these chapters, so thematic clusters in which the negotiations will be driven forward. And of course, in order to accede to or to join the European Union, all so-called Copenhagen criteria have to be fulfilled. So this is, on the one side, the EU acquis, the whole legislation, but also political criteria like the respect for the rule of law, democracy, human rights, and economic criteria like the functioning of a competitive market economy. The whole process and the implementation of the necessary reforms are continuously monitored by the European Commission, and their results are presented in the annual so-called enlargement package, which includes country reports for each of the countries and proposes a decision also on how to proceed with these countries. And maybe we can move on to the next slide. For the Western Balkans, there is also a pre-accession process in place, the so-called stabilization and association process, which already helps to bring the countries closer to the standards of the EU through individual association partnerships. So you can see now various squares. The blue one, the bigger square, so includes all countries of the Western Balkans, which are part of the stabilization and association process. And there we have 2 countries which have not yet candidate status, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo. Then we have the light blue square with 2 so-called candidate countries, but which have not yet started official negotiations. These are Albania and North Macedonia. The Council, so the EU member states, have taken the decision in March 2020 to start accession negotiations with these 2 countries. Then the Commission has provided all the formal necessary documents, the so-called negotiation framework, which unfortunately could not be adopted last year. And we really hope that now in 2021, we will soon start the accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. And then in the center, we have our countries with which the EU is currently negotiating. We have Montenegro, which started in 2012 with the accession negotiations. They have opened 33 chapters, and Serbia, with whom we have started negotiations in 2014, and here 18 of the 35 chapters are opened. To have a full picture, I also included Turkey, which is also a membership candidate, a candidate country with accession negotiations. But here, actually, negotiations have come to a standstill 2-3 years ago. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Which just gives another overview of where the countries stand. And I have to apologize. This is not up to date because it still says Macedonia, and we all know the country is now called North Macedonia. I would just like also to draw your attention to the new methodology of EU enlargement, which was presented by the European Commission in February 2020 and will be now adopted for all countries as of this year. With this new methodology, the EU attaches even greater importance to reforms at a very early stage in the area of the fundamentals. So this means the rule of law, fundamental rights, strengthening of democratic institutions, improving economic governance and public administration. So, and the focus has changed because now chapters which relate to these areas will be opened first and will be closed last. So the process of reforms in these areas also determines the overall progress. And I think that's a very important point to know for all countries, that this focus will be now very closely, and the progress here will be very closely monitored. The process, in my view, becomes even stricter because the conditionality has also been strengthened. A new element of this methodology is that in the case of a stagnation or deterioration in certain fields, there can be sanctions and accession negotiations can even be suspended. We really hope that we will not have to implement these steps, but this is sort of a new stick in the carrots and sticks principle. Thank God there are also some carrots in the new methodology, like an increased political dialogue on highest level and the possibility also to enter certain EU policies earlier when all the necessary reforms have been implemented. As you're all aware, the EU also financially supports the countries in their accession with the instrument for pre-accession, IPA. And I'm sure many of you have already come across projects financed by IPA. Currently, a new regulation, IPA 3, is negotiated with the European Parliament. We really hope that it will be adopted in March and can then be implemented. IPA 3 foresees a sum of 14.2 billion for all potential and candidate countries, including Turkey. So it means about 2/3 will go to the Western Balkan countries. A point which I'm sure you all also are aware or have been working on is the reform in public administration through administrative partnerships between EU member states and candidate countries through twinning and TAIEX. And Austria has been very actively involved in the implementation of twinning projects, more than 400 projects so far. And Austria is also at the moment one of the most active partners in twinning projects in Southeast Europe. Just a word on the COVID pandemic. As you might know, the EU supports the Western Balkan countries in tackling the COVID pandemic. Last year, in May 2020, the EU decided a prioritized treatment of the Southeast European region through a COVID aid package worth 3.3 billion euros. And in last December, the EU decided to also give to the countries additional 70 million euros to access COVID-19 vaccines. And there are special programs in place to also provide Western Balkan countries with vaccines. But as you're following news, the issue of the receiving vaccines is also a huge problem in EU member states. An important element that has also been adopted last year was a new economic and investment package or plan for the Western Balkans. The plan essentially represents a strategy for the post-COVID economic recovery, as well as for the long-term sustainable growth in the region. It therefore focuses on the fields of environment, energy, but also digitalization, infrastructure, the private sector, and in the area of education. It will be funded with 9 billion euros through IPA 3. So as soon as IPA 3 is adopted, we will also be able to implement this economic and investment plan. Can I have the next slide, please? I would just like to add to these points that the whole accession process is very importantly also supported by organizations, by regional organizations, but also by many other initiatives. I would just like to mention the Regional Cooperation Council, which is essential for bringing the countries closer to EU standards, but also CEFTA, the free trade agreement, which has hugely helped to also improve intra-regional trade. There is a study that intra-regional trade has increased by 37% because of CEFTA. A new element which now also comes in place is the common regional market. We hope that we will also see some developments in this regard in 2021. Now, before concluding, I would like to reiterate a point from the beginning. Enlargement is technical, but also highly political. It largely depends on the political will of EU member states to move on in the process, to take on new members. The last years have been difficult for the EU. It all started with the economic and financial crisis in 2008. We had then the migration and refugee crisis, Brexit, COVID. All huge challenges for the EU and the EU member states. And so, again, like very often, the EU is very much focused on itself. It is quite inward looking in this phase. But the EU has to pay attention not to lose the region to others. The EU has to be aware that Southeast Europe is of highest geostrategic interest and importance for all of us. There can't be an alternative to the European perspective. And Austria is constantly promoting this point within the EU. Maybe now, together with the new US administration, we will also be able to be strong partners for the region. And hopefully both sides, the Southeast European countries as well as the EU member states, will find again the motivation to proceed on the path of EU integration with more energy and dynamism than in the last years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Huber, for this concise overview and the things you pointed out. We have now 17 minutes left for questions. I would suggest that you write your question either into the chat, or if you want to make the question live, then please write me also in the chat that you would like to do so. I already have one question. How is Austria supporting the Berlin process, and how important is the work for RCC for the accession process? Ms. Huber?
Well, thank you for the question. Austria attaches great importance to all organizations dealing with Southeast Europe, and we actively participate in, I would say, all organizations or initiatives or wherever this is possible. The RCC is of highest importance. You mentioned when you were so kind to introduce me that I worked at the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe, which was actually the predecessor organization of the Regional Cooperation Council. At that time, the EU and other international partners like the US and Canada were in the driving seat. And now it has become a regional organization. So this is a great success. The so-called regional ownership, I think, is very well demonstrated by the RCC. And so we fully support the RCC and all their projects. The Berlin process is more of an initiative, not a formal organization. An initiative launched by Chancellor Angela Merkel in 2014. That's why it's called Berlin process. And there is only a group of a couple of EU member states, and now also the former member states, the United Kingdom, participating in this Berlin process. But also this initiative has been quite important with several aspects on which each presidency concentrated, like, for example, in the area of infrastructure and interconnectivity. The Berlin process helped to secure additional funds through the EIB and EBRD. Then another focus of the Berlin process is economic cooperation, with also creating a regional chamber of commerce or helping in this regard. And also now with supporting this new plan for a common regional market. The Berlin process is also involved in helping with bilateral issues and has put forward some proposals regarding, for example, the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. So there are several very concrete projects, and we can only support all the initiatives and programs that are happening in the region and that are supporting the region in its EU integration.
Very much. I've got another question from Mr. Sayasi from NALAS. How do you see the involvement of NALAS, local governments, in the regional and EU integration process?
Thank you very much. Of course, this is very, very important because I think in order for EU integration to be successful, it can not be only a top-down approach, so with decisions by the government, but it has to be a bottom-up approach, and all levels of society have to be involved. So here, of course, local governments play a very important role, and that's why I also would like to congratulate KDZ for all your activities and your important projects in this regard. So this is one element, this official EU accession process where the legislation of the EU is adopted and implemented. But in order to be a future or to be an EU member state, the whole society has to be on board, and all levels of society have to be or follow certain EU standards, and also be able to sort of feel like being part of this process. And that's why NALAS and the participants of this conference are doing very important work, which is why I also mentioned Twinning and TIEX projects, where some of you might be involved. These very concrete projects, and especially also the peer-to-peer projects with experts coming from member states and closely cooperating with experts in the countries. All of these projects are of highest importance.
You already mentioned the peer-to-peer projects, TIEX, Twinnings, in order to involve all stakeholders and actors into the EU enlargement process and EU integration process. Is there anything else what could be done better to involve civil society and local governments in the countries into the integration process?
Another very important point, because as I said, all levels of society should be part of this integration process. And with civil society, it's a bit difficult, because from the outside, we always say it is important to take on civil society. Civil society has to be part of this whole process. But at the same time, it is difficult to sort of put forward these proposals from the outside. Civil society has their own mechanisms, and it's also, it of course depends on democratic structures in the countries. If civil society has a real say and is really a stakeholder or a player in this process. And here we try to, of course, also with many twinning projects to strengthen civil society, to work with organizations, institutions, also to improve, of course, the knowledge, but also to make them stronger in order for them to be able to pronounce that they want to be a part of the process. And we see it in many countries where civil society is not strong enough, doesn't have the same possibilities like in our countries. I'm just thinking, for example, of a country which comes more and more into the focus of the European agenda again is Bosnia and Herzegovina. Not only because of the refugee and migration crisis, but with the questions, where does this country actually stand? And what we also thought of now better somehow addressing the issue, what do the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, what does the civil society think of where their country wants to go? What is the future of the country? And I think this is a dialogue that will be supported now also by the EU. The EU Special Representative is very active in this field, and we hope to see some progress.
I have also a question. Do you think that the current COVID-19 pandemic crisis has negative impact on the negotiations, but also in general on the enlargement process?
Well, as I said, there are many challenges the EU is faced with. like Brexit in the last year and now the COVID pandemic, which puts the focus on other areas than EU enlargement. So the whole technical process, the screening, the monitoring by the European Commission, the evaluation by the Council, so by the member states, that's constantly happening. So there are meetings every week in Brussels. There is a so-called Council working group, which monitors all the dossiers and the various levels of this integration process. But this is the technical side. So this continues slowly, to be honest, but that goes on. What is missing right now is the political focus, the will by member states to address this issue properly or to prioritize it. Here it also, of course, always depends on the EU presidency. Last year, the German presidency was very active and very eager also to show some progress in this area. Unfortunately, there were several bilateral issues which hindered us from moving on. Now we have the Portuguese presidency, which is mainly dealing now with the COVID pandemic. And then in the second half of 2021, we will have the Slovene EU presidency. So with this country, again, being very close to the region, we hope that they will put again the focus on the enlargement issue and will drive this process on.
Thank you.
Forward.
But
sorry, just to come back, I mean, you know, all these challenges we are facing, they have to be addressed first. So this takes away a lot of attention, also energy, especially on the political level. And I think that's, especially with the COVID pandemic, also a natural development that here the priorities lie on tackling this.
I have 3 more questions in the chat, the last ones, because we have only 6 minutes left for the break. So one of the question is, I put that one with COVID first. With the COVID pandemic, we see trends to more centralized and authoritarian governance, also within EU countries. How to keep it attractive for Western Balkan countries to enhance democracy as part of the integration process? This is one question. Another question refers to Moldova. How do you see the future of the Republic of Moldova within the EU? And the last question is, what is your opinion? Do the SDGs play a role in the EU integration process? And before answering the question, I just will read out loud a comment from our colleague Stefan Lüttgenau. We see inside EU and the SCE European region the key problem of transparency. Policies, national and with regard to the EU, need to enjoy higher degree of transparency. This will enable civil society to act on a much more qualified level of information. Thank you, Stefan, for this comment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, many questions. To start with the first one, the aspect of the question of where do we stand with our democracies when tackling the COVID pandemic. Here is one aspect is very important of the new methodology, which I mentioned already, and now I'm referring to the Western Balkan countries, that all the issues which are linked to the so-called fundamentals, so the area of fundamental rights, of democratic institutions, of the rule of law, which also includes fighting corruption, transparency issues. So here the member states and also the Commission will put a very strong focus on all of these areas. And this will be very closely monitored and constantly evaluated. And as I said, progress in these areas will also determine the overall progress of negotiations. So member states, if they see that countries are falling behind, that the necessary reforms are not implemented, they will also say, okay, then let's stop maybe in some other areas where there might only be some technical questions. Previously, the accession process mostly started with the easy chapters where there was very little acquis, where the countries could implement the acquis faster. And now it's turned around. So actually we are starting and we are ending with the maybe most difficult areas. And here let me also mention again the so-called enlargement package, the monitoring reports, the country reports of the European Commission, which are presented every year and hopefully also this year. They are taken very seriously. So the member states are studying these reports in detail, and the Council always reacts to these reports with proposing further measures. So there is a direct influence on taking decisions like moving on with further chapters or with putting forward new benchmarks, new conditions. So I think we have here a very good monitoring mechanism also for questions of democratic institutions and reforms. The second question, I remember Moldova, but you have to remind me.
How do you see the future of the Republic of Moldova?
Yes, Moldova. Moldova and the EU have also signed an association agreement. It is in place since 2014, so there are already special links with the Republic of Moldova. The Republic of Moldova is also a priority country within the Eastern Partnership. And in general, there is also, of course, the perspective of EU membership. With all I've said before, with tackling the current challenges within the EU, but also globally with the COVID pandemic, and then with continuing the accession process with the Western Balkan countries, which has become a rather slow process in the last years. To be very honest, I don't see further concrete steps in the near future, and my focus is on the near future. But everything again depends on reforms which are taken by the country, by Moldova, and only the countries can, in this respect, be in the driving seat and move that they are and show that they are moving closer to the European Union.
And the last question was, on your opinion, if the SDGs play a role in the EU integration process.
Yes. I mentioned the economic and investment plan, and this is oriented towards, or here the focus is put on the aspect of climate change, of also, and here we have the connection to the SDGs. So the priorities clearly go hand in hand with the SDGs. And we have seen several initiatives also by the countries of the region themselves to put a focus on and to align themselves with with the EU plans in this respect. So yes, they play a role and they become more and more important, and especially now when we will be able to implement the economic and investment plan, the new rollout for IPA 3, where there will be a clear focus on these areas.
Thank you very much, Ms. Huber, for joining us today and for sharing your expertise with us. It's now exactly 10:30, so we are perfectly in time, and it's time for a short coffee break. We will meet again then at 10:45 directly at the session Impact of the COVID-19 Pandemic. So enjoy your coffee and thank you very much for participating. Thank you.
Thank you and have a great conference today.